You'd think the land of the living would be the main concern at dawn, but in ancient Egypt, your first audience wasn't the sun, God, it was the dead. I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight, you'll rise alongside someone who starts their day not with porridge, but with a quiet chat to a distant grandmother who's been dead for 30 years. It's not considered odd, it's considered polite. A breath of dawn drifts through your open window. Papyrus reeds rustle, frogs murmur along the canals, and a goat somewhere is having its usual morning disagreement with a basket. You pull on your linen kilt, still damp from last night's river rinse, and pad barefoot across cool floor tiles. Outside, the sky is painted a dusty rose, and already the air carries the faint scent of embalmer's resin and baking barley bread. Somewhere, a woman is chanting to the gods in between smacks of laundry on stone. And beside your front door, shaded by a crumbling fig tree, a family tomb waits half altar, half mailbox, with yesterday's beer offering still warm from the sun. If a whisper of ancestral mystery gently ruffles your sleep-hungry brain, consider tapping, like, and subscribe. It won't bring your great-uncle back from the dead, but it might summon another tale next week. Strange question, but if one historical figure could haunt your dreams tonight, who would you want it to be? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The old man across the alley greets you with a nod and an onion. He's heading to the fields. You're heading to the tomb. The path is dusty but familiar, past mud brick homes, daubed with chalky white prayers, past the bakery, where ghost stories and gossip rise like steam. You crouch beside the low stone niche, carved just a foot above the ground. It's cool to the touch. The offering shelf holds yesterday's stale bread, 2 coins, and what was probably once a fig. You brush away a lizard and lean close. Grandmother, you whisper, thanks for that dream. The river's still too high to fish. Silence. But somehow, silence here doesn't feel empty. It feels crowded. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not a singular event, but an ongoing relationship. The dead were not banished or entombed into forgetfulness. They were neighbors, some literally. Tombs were often dug just beyond the village fence, where jackals might poke their noses, but spirits were always within earshot. It wasn't unusual to have your ancestors buried a few dozen steps from your kitchen, and it wasn't unusual to speak to them daily, as naturally as one might speak to a houseplant or the cat. This wasn't superstition, it was maintenance. The logic was elegant. The dead still needed company. They still offered advice, warnings, occasionally, sarcasm, and dreams. If you ignored them, well, don't be surprised if your grain spoiled or your goat started biting visitors. Tombs were like spiritual phone booths. You dropped off messages, complaints, offerings. And much like bureaucracies today, the dead sometimes replied cryptically or not at all. Inside the carved recess, you notice a line of hieroglyphs. The red paint has mostly flaked away, but one glyph, a little man squatting with a loaf, still clings on. That's Hotep, meaning peace or contentment. A good sign. Maybe your grandmother is in a decent mood this morning. Some scholars still debate how literally these morning rituals were taken. Were they symbolic, habitual, performed, just in case? But clay tablets suggest villagers kept records of complaints to their dead, like spiritual Yelp reviews filed in tombs. One note discovered near Deir el Medina reads in rough translation, "My father, why do you not answer me? You have let thieves into my courtyard. This is not good behavior. Strong words for a ghost." You sit back on your heels. The sun is rising higher now. Time to move. A group of boys runs past with wooden swords, shrieking about crocodile gods and tomb traps. You smile, then glance once more at the grave. Was that a breeze or a breath? You've started the day not with ambition or urgency, but with memory, with a check-in to the quiet population beneath your feet. They are not gone. They are just waiting to be spoken to. And now, before your own stomach starts grumbling, It's time to offer breakfast to someone else first. The kitchen smells like yesterday, which is to say warm bread, drying onions, and just the faintest whiff of something fermenting in a corner pot you've been meaning to clean. You carry a small basket to the shrine tucked in the wall niche of your home, a slab of limestone painted with two wide eyes and a stylized nose representing the spirit's presence. The offerings must come before your own meal. That's not piety, it's etiquette. You place the bread carefully, not too stale, but firm enough to hold its shape. A splash of beer follows the kind brewed at home with emmer and dates cloudy and slightly sour. Then, with a quick gesture, you add onions halved raw, still sharp with bite. The spirits, it's said, like pungent things. You murmur a line from a well-worn prayer, not out of obligation, but habit, the way one might say, "Excuse me," to an empty chair you've just bumped. In ancient Egyptian homes, these small rituals anchored the day. It wasn't enough to bury your loved ones properly, you had to feed them too, every day if possible. Families maintained household shrines or walked to tomb chapels depending on wealth and geography. But even the humblest household might offer up scraps, a heel of bread, a pinch of salt, a fig if one could be spared. These weren't metaphorical gifts. They were believed to nourish the ka, the vital essence of the dead that still lingered hungry and watchful. One quirky papyrus describes a widow scolding her ghost husband for stealing food from her cooking pot. "I gave you beer," she writes. "I gave you garlic. Why are you haunting my lentils?" Apparently, even the dead could get peckish and petty. Some modern scholars suggest these offerings were symbolic, perhaps more tradition than belief, but others point out that tomb murals and burial goods often depict food in extreme detail, implying a genuine concern for feeding the deceased. There's also evidence that leftovers were often eaten by priests or family members after the spirits had their turn, meaning nothing went to waste spiritually or practically. You glance at your own modest breakfast waiting on the table, more bread a date or two, perhaps cheese if you're lucky. But you don't touch it yet. First come the ancestors. Outside, your neighbor is doing the same, placing figs in a cracked ceramic dish beside a painted wall. You nod in quiet solidarity. In a way, the village shares a meal with its dead every morning, a communal breakfast with invisible guests. The dead aren't mourned, they're hosted. You add a final touch, a dab of natron on the incense cone, watching it hiss and sizzle into fragrant smoke. A single fly buzzes near the bread, but doesn't land. Maybe the spirits have taken their fill already. Only now, after these gestures are complete, do you turn toward your own bowl and break your fast. The food tastes better, somehow warmer, earned. Around you the world hums into motion, but you've already begun your day with balance, one foot in life, one still dipped in memory. Your path winds gently along the village edge, where the homes give way to flat sand and scattered acacia trees. In one hand, you carry a small jug of oil. In the other, a stiff reed brush bristling and patched with linen twine. No, you're not heading to a temple. You're a tomb cleaner, and it's time for work. The job sounds grim to outsiders, but in your village, it's considered a stable post. Someone must care for the resting places. Tombs do not maintain themselves, especially when the desert winds carry grit into every crevice, and the occasional ibis decides to relieve itself on sacred murals. Your task is simple: clear the sand, brush the offering tables, and reapply the protective oils to the carved lintels. It's not glamorous, but the dead are your clients, and they rarely complain out loud. There's a tomb at the foot of the ridge that's always given you trouble. The lintel is crooked, the shade patchy, and the guardian statue is missing its nose. You swear the air feels heavier there. Today the wind has carved odd tracks around it, spirals like the path of a drunk serpent. You mutter an apology as you kneel beside the entrance. Daily tomb maintenance in ancient Egypt wasn't a fringe activity. It was a regular occupation, especially near elite cemeteries like those at Saqqara and Thebes. Workers were often hired to sweep repaint and even restock the offering trays on behalf of wealthier families who had moved away or simply couldn't be bothered. In return, they were paid in goods, oil bread, leftover stew, or sometimes, as records hint, in small copper coins or worn linen garments. Whether this amounted to wages or charity remains hotly debated among historians. One curious Ostrakhan fragment records a dispute between two tomb workers over who got to keep a half-finished loaf. It was on the offering tray, one wrote, but the ghost did not take it, which, to be fair, is a difficult thing to verify. You dip the brush in oil and gently rub it across a sun-bleached relief of a woman offering lotus flowers. The colors are nearly gone, but if you squint, you can see traces of blue and rust red. It's good work, this. Quiet. The dead may not praise you, but they also never shout, most days. Still, even here, debate clings like dust. Were tomb cleaners seen as lowly servants, or subtle ritualists maintaining cosmic balance? Some researchers argue their job was merely functional, no more sacred than sweeping a temple floor. Others suggest they were deeply embedded in spiritual life, acting as intermediaries between the seen and unseen, especially in tombs, whose owners were still remembered with prayers and offerings. You pause to drink from a leather flask. The wind is rising. Time to move on to the next tomb. A falcon screeches overhead. You shield your eyes, then chuckle softly. The statue's missing nose seems somehow less judgmental today. You leave behind a swept path, a polished stone, and a few whispered words for whoever listens beneath. The market hums before you even round the bend. Laughter haggling the squawk of chickens and baskets, it's all a familiar dusty chorus. But beneath the cumin-scented chaos, one thing stands out. Death is on display here too. And it's surprisingly cute. On a woven mat, a trader lays out miniature sarcophagi. They're carved from wood or faience, brightly painted in hues of indigo ochre and leaf green. Some feature carefully etched eyes. Others have crooked smiles, as if the gods had a sense of humor. Beside them, tiny shabti figurines, each no bigger than your thumb, their arms crossed like serious bureaucrats. Some wear painted wigs. One has a chipped foot, but he'll still work in the afterlife, supposedly. You stop at a stall draped with linen panels. The merchant waves a palm frond, lazily fending off flies. 2 for 1 today, she says, nodding toward the amulets shaped like mummified cats. Or 3 if you buy the eyeliner stick, too. You're not here to shop, really. But your cousin is getting older, and everyone knows it's polite to start preparing a burial trousseau before your teeth fall out. Death, it turns out, is big business. Ancient Egyptian marketplaces didn't separate life from death the way we might expect. Burial items were everyday trade goods. Need a new pair of sandals? Pick up a jackal-headed charm while you're at it. Artisans mass-produce these items, sometimes using molds to churn out dozens of shabtis at a time. Buyers might personalize them with their names or spells, but the basic design stayed the same, efficient, affordable, and highly portable. Some scholars remain puzzled by the sheer volume of these charms. Did everyone really need a miniature servant army in the afterlife? Or were they insurance more charms, meant more comfort on the other side? One record from a village ledger shows a woman trading 4 goats for 20 shabtis. That's either devotion or someone who really didn't like chores. A boy tugs at your tunic, holding up a bead necklace strung with scarab charms. For protection, he whispers. His teeth are missing, but his eyes are shrewd. You smile, ruffle his hair, and hand him a dried fig. A fair trade. You wander past a spice merchant, then a scribe's stall where small papyri hang like laundry. Some feature spells, others cartoons, a hippo chasing a man, a priest asleep in a wine vat. Mortality and humor side by side. It's not irreverence, it's familiarity. When you live with death as a neighbor, you joke, you decorate it, you sell it at a discount. The sun climbs higher. A vendor slaps his knee and yells about a sale on afterlife starter kits. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a bronze mirror, wind-blown sun dark, a little older than you remember. You tighten your grip on the tiny amulet you did end up buying. It's shaped like a frog. You're not sure what it does, but it feels right in your palm. And anyway, who says the afterlife can't have a bit of style? You didn't mean to eavesdrop, but in a market this dense gossip flows like incense smoke. The scent draws you in first. Something sharp, medicinal, soaked into linen. Then the voice. They say the smelly priest botched it again, a scribe mutters to his friend. He's nibbling a fig and smirking like a cat. Left the brain in, whole head rattled. You keep walking slowly. Embalming tales are rarely accurate, but they're never dull. Mummification, for all its sacred trappings, was also a craft practical, private, and whispered about. Not everyone got the royal treatment, of course. Some were wrapped quickly and frugally with resin that stuck like syrup and spells that might have been copied from the wrong scroll. But for the elite embalmers were specialists, priestly figures who knew how to drain dry and wrap with surgical calm. They wielded copper hooks, stone jars, and patience. And according to street rumor, a very particular smell. You pass the embalmer's workshop on your way out of the market. It's half hidden behind a reed fence shaded by palms. A boy runs out carrying a clay pot that steams faintly. You catch a whiff, bitter herbs, and warm fat. A recipe for preservation or lunch, hard to say. Inside, the rituals are exacting. The body is washed in palm wine. The organs removed and placed in jars, watched over by baboon-headed gods. The brain is often discarded, though how reliably it was removed depends on the region and, according to modern debates, the day's mood. Some scholars argue that the famed nasal hook method was only used later. Others believe it was far more common than inscriptions admit. There's no consensus, just scraps of papyri tool marks on skulls and the smell of ancient natron still lingering in certain tombs. You remember the time your uncle visited an embalmer after his friend died unexpectedly. He returned pale and quiet, muttering about dolls made of ribs, and a woman who whispered spells with her eyes closed. He wouldn't eat meat for a week. Nearby, a vendor sells miniature embalming kits carved from wood, tiny hooks, jars, linen strips. Children treat them like toys. You shake your head. The line between reverence and routine grows blurrier by the minute. Mummification was a service, but it was also a mystery. The names of many embalmers are lost. They weren't heralded like priests or warriors. They worked in hot rooms behind closed walls and kept secrets as tightly wrapped as their clients. And yet, their hands shaped the afterlife literally. Every layer of linen, every amulet tucked beneath a tongue carried the weight of belief. You glance at the temple spire in the distance where doves circle lazily. Somewhere inside, another embalming is underway. Or maybe it's finished, and the workers are already sipping beer in the shade, debating whether eyes should be painted open or closed. A fly lands on your arm. You flick it away and keep walking. One day someone like you might carry your story in whispers too. The house smells like crushed pigment and oil. You duck beneath the low lintel and blink. The walls are alive with color. A half-finished coffin rests in the center of the room, propped on two stools, its surface sketched with jackals, eyes, and stars. Your friend Henu sits cross-legged beside it, brush in hand, humming off-key. She doesn't look up. "Does Anubis need more eyeliner?" she asks, pointing at a sketched jackal deity whose eyes already seem heavily lined. You grin, maybe just a touch. The afterlife is unforgiving to bad makeup. Preparing for death, it turns out, isn't just for priests and princes. In ancient Egypt, even ordinary folks like Henu painted their own coffins, chose their own spells, and budgeted for burial goods long before their final breath. If you could afford to plan, you did. If not, you improvised. But everyone hoped to arrive in the afterlife with a little style and a lot of precaution. Henu's brushes sit neatly in a row, reeds bundled twine, even a chewed stick, and each has a purpose. One for outlines, one for filling in sky blue, and one she calls the fixer, used when Anubis's ears turn out lopsided. A jar of red ochre sits beside her knee, along with a scrap of linen where she's testing hieroglyphs for her name. The coffin lid is hers, plain cedar sourced from far up the Nile, the interior lined in protective verses. She's painted 6 already adapted from various books of the dead. None of them match, and that's normal. Despite the grand name, the Book of the Dead was never a single text. It was a choose-your-own afterlife adventure, different spells for different fears, different illustrations for different beliefs. No 2 scrolls were the same because no 2 deaths were. Some focused on protection from demons, others on guidance through judgment. And many like Hennu's were cobbled together from family copies, temple purchases, and oral recitations remembered from funerals past. Scholars still debate whether villagers truly understood the texts they painted or simply mimicked what seemed potent. One theory suggests spell selection was more about personal anxiety than theology, fear of snakes' use, spell, in 36. Worried about losing your name in the underworld, add spell 125b. Another theory insists that even the humblest painters like Hennu were guided by temple scribes who visited to consult, advise, and occasionally correct jackal ears. You watch as she adds a line of glyphs beneath a floating heart. "That one's for my grandmother," she says softly. "She always said I'd get lost without directions." It's touching, and a little funny. Hennu has never been lost a day in her life. In the corner, a cat stretches yawns and knocks over a bowl of lapis chips. Neither of you bother to clean it up. The gods will forgive a little mess, surely. She offers you the brush. Want to do the border. You shake your head. Your handwriting's better. She shrugs, dips the brush, and continues painting her own gateway to forever, one line at a time, under flickering lamplight, with a quiet certainty that even death deserves a personal touch. A cry pierces the air long drawn out, and startling enough to make you drop your date cake. You glance toward the village gate. A funeral procession is coming slow and solemn, with a soundscape that could shatter glass. At its head, 3 women dressed in ragged black faces smeared with ashes wail in perfect eerie unison. They hired the loud ones, someone mutters nearby, stuffing figs into a basket. Must have had coin to spare. The wailing women, as they're often called, were a common feature of Egyptian funerals, especially in wealthier or more devout households. Their role wasn't just noise, it was grief performed with precision. They sang, shouted, collapsed theatrically, and tore at their hair. It wasn't just about mourning. It was about showing that the deceased had been loved loudly. You follow the crowd drawn by the cadence of lamentation. The lead mourner wears a necklace of blue beads and a linen sash that flutters as she spins slowly in place, arms raised to the sky. Her voice rises again, trembling but powerful. She doesn't seem to breathe between wails. Her companion shrieks in counterpoint. Together they conjure a sort of musical chaos, controlled but chaotic like a desert storm, choreographed by the gods. Costumes matter here. Each dynasty had its own funeral fashion. In some periods, mourners wore sheared linens and wigs. In others, they appeared almost priestly in muted reds and saffron yellows. You spot one woman wearing a leopard pelt across her shoulders, a bold nod to older customs. One child clutches a doll with soot-smudged cheeks mimicking the professionals around her. Historians argue endlessly about these women. Were they true mourners or just skilled performers? Some evidence suggests they were trained in temple schools. Others believe they were itinerant hired per burial. Papyrus records even hint at different packages for different budgets. Basic crying deluxe, sobbing premium shoulder beating with optional ululation. One curious tomb painting shows a mourner fainting dramatically beside a well-stocked offering table. Some scholars say it's symbolic. Others suspect the artist simply had a flair for comedy. You edge closer. The coffin draped in linen and garlands is carried by 6 men. As it passes, the wailing rises to a near howl. One mourner drops to her knees in the sand, scooping it into her hair. The procession slows. The scent of incense drifts past frankincense and myrrh, strong enough to fight back the smell of sun-baked bodies and old grief. You wonder if the deceased would recognize any of this, or if from their new vantage point they might be embarrassed by all the fuss. Still, it's hard not to be moved. The noise, the rhythm, the sheer volume of it, it's grief as public art raw and stylized. As the group moves on, heading west toward the tombs, the sound begins to fade. A few children chase after them, mimicking the wails and giggling when they fall over. Life folds around death, as it always does. And the wailing women. They'll be back tomorrow or the next day, ready to grieve again for coin, for ritual, or maybe sometimes for real. As you as a sacred ibis hops into your path, its long beak bobbing with offended elegance. You bow slightly customary when one interrupts a divine bird and toss it a few grains from your pocket. It pecks once, then waddles away, disdainful but appeased. Nearby, your neighbor waves from his doorway, holding a bundle wrapped in linen. For Bastet, he says, nodding toward the bundle, which gives a soft, unmistakable meow. Pet burials are not rare. In fact, they're booming. You head toward the small shrine by the canal, where people leave offerings for their animal companions living and dead. The spot buzzes with flies, incense, and soft chatter. A priest accepts bundles, tags them with reed labels, and stacks them in neat rows. Some are birds, some cats, a few monkeys. All mummified, all sacred. The smell is a mix of resin straw and something oddly sweet, maybe lotus petals, maybe just the Nile. To ancient Egyptians, animals weren't just company, they were conduits. Cats were the eyes of Bastet ibises, the beaks of Thoth. Crocodiles, the guardians of Sobek. And when one died, it wasn't just a loss, it was a moment of ritual. Families preserved pets alongside family members. Some wealthier households even had separate tombs built for favored cats, complete with their own spells and trinkets. And the industry, it kept growing. By the late period, animal mummification had become an economy unto itself. Priests bred animals specifically for burial. Vendors sold miniature coffins, some beautifully carved, others quickly wrapped in coarse linen and stuffed with bones. Not always the correct bones. Archaeologists have found bundles labeled hawk that contain rodent sticks, or in one unfortunate case, a wad of linen and pebbles. Either the priests ran out of hawks, or someone got a very budget blessing. Scholars still argue how sincerely this system was believed. Was it devotion, business? Both. Some say the mummified animals were symbolic prayers offerings to gods with feathers and fur. Others argue they were ancient scams, mass-produced piety for a fee. But the sheer volume suggests emotional weight. At sites like Saqqara, thousands, sometimes millions of animal mummies have been found, layered in catacombs, stacked like scrolls. A child places a tiny papyrus-wrapped mouse at the base of the shrine. His sister whispers a short verse, one about safe journeys and cheese. You suppress a smile. The gods presumably understand nuance. You glance again at your neighbor's bundle. The linen twitches. The cat, it seems, is not yet ready for the afterlife. Bastet can wait another day. You leave a feather on the altar, a quiet token carried by wind or wing. The ibis is gone, but the flies linger. Sacred work, it seems, is never glamorous. As you walk back toward town, you hear a rustle in the brush. Another cat or something more watchful, hard to say. In this place, gods don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they simply purr, peck, or glide overhead. And sometimes they wait for offerings in the shape of a very impatient chicken. You hear the low splash before you see them, funeral boats sliding slowly down the Nile like mournful swans. You step aside onto a flat rock above the riverbank. From here, the view is perfect. The boats move silently, pulled by the current, or guided by poles, their cargo swaddled in white linen, framed by painted wood and bunches of lotus blossoms. The first boat is simple, a narrow papyrus skiff, its bow curled like a snake's tongue. 4 family members paddle quietly, eyes forward expressions unreadable. A basket of offerings sits near the stern, bread onions, a jug of beer. A cat yowls from somewhere beneath the tarpaulin, hopefully alive. The second boat is a showstopper. Gilded paint flashes in the sun, and a carved falcon's head graces the prow. Incense smoke trails from a swinging censer. Musicians play a slow thudding beat, while 2 women scatter petals into the water. Someone coughs theatrically. A priest adjusts his leopard skin stole and continues chanting. In ancient Egypt, funeral transport was not a footnote, it was a ritual. The Nile was more than a highway, it was a divine artery. Just as the soul traveled west into the land of the dead, the body had to follow, ideally by boat. The West Bank was where the sun died each night, and where tombs were most often carved. River burials then weren't symbolic, they were logistical theology. For wealthier families, the funerary bark was often elaborately carved, painted, and occasionally plated with real gold leaf, or, as some scholars argue, simply painted to look gold, a matter still debated in the quiet corners of museum storage rooms. No physical golden boats have ever been found, only stories and paint fragments. Were they melted down, or never real to begin with? Even humbler families rented boats for the day. Some records mention funeral ferry contracts, complete with damage fees and late return penalties. One badly preserved tablet describes a dispute where a boatman absconded mid-procession, allegedly after being insulted by the deceased's cousin. The priest had to finish the trip in a fisherman's skiff. You watch as a third boat drifts past. On it lies a wrapped figure, serene and stiff, flanked by jars and a single burning lamp. A boy leans over to adjust the linen shroud, almost falling in. Someone laughs. The priest scowls. A goose honks from the far bank, unimpressed. River funerals stitch the sacred and the mundane. They reminded everyone watching that death traveled with them, slowly, visibly like a shadow trailing the boat's wake. Even today, villagers gather at the water's edge, offering blessings or quiet comments about the floral choices. As the last boat disappears around the bend, a breeze lifts the scent of lilies and oil. You feel the hush left behind, a kind of silence that clings to water. The river resumes its usual rhythm, as if nothing happened, and yet something did. Someone passed, someone sailed west. The rest of you remain waiting, watching, perhaps preparing your own vessel someday. Dinner is late. The stew is mostly lentils, a few suspicious bits of dried fish, and something that might have once been leek. But no one minds, because someone, probably your uncle, has started telling judgment stories again. You chew slowly, not because of reverence, but because you're trying not to laugh with your mouth full. He failed the heart test, your uncle says, poking his spoon toward the sky. Heart heavier than a crocodile. They say Amit didn't even chew, just gulped it down like a grape. Auntie rolls her eyes. That's not how it works. You're confusing it with the baboon trial. Baboons weren't at the trial. They were scribes, you cabbage. It's a common dinner debate, the weighing of the heart. Every Egyptian knew it, feared it, told it differently. Your soul, your ib, was weighed against a feather of Mehat, the goddess of truth and balance. If lighter, you passed into eternal paradise. If heavier, you were devoured by Amit, part lion, part hippo. All appetite. The core story appears in countless tombs and scrolls, but the details infinitely variable. Some depicted Anubis weighing the heart, Thoth recording the results, Osiris presiding with a patient glare. Others added guardian spirits' curses or test questions. One scroll describes a talking scale. Another has the heart itself confessing sins in a voice described as like broken flutes. Modern scholars can't agree on how literal Egyptians took these tales. Were they symbolic moral lessons, Or was this genuinely expected an afterlife tribunal with divine stenographers and monster bailiffs? Surviving texts contradict each other. Some say your heart could be lightened by prayers. Others suggest it betrayed you no matter what. Your cousin pipes up. What if someone swapped your heart before the test? Silence. Then general agreement that this would be cheating. Then a renewed argument about whether that had ever happened to anyone important. You excuse yourself stepping outside for air. The night is still warm. A few stars peek between date palms. You hear another family down the road in mid-debate. Words float toward you. Papyrus mistake. Osiris forgives farmers not if they hoard barley. Judgment isn't just a dinner topic. It's a cultural pastime. It's easy to see why. The weighing of the heart is elegant, personal. The gods don't weigh your deeds, they weigh your essence. No lawyers, no loopholes. Just you, a feather, and a beast with sharp teeth. It brings justice into the realm of story, lets even children feel the weight of ethics. Back inside, your uncle is now arguing that the heart can lie, and that's why spells were invented. Your aunt counters that, if the heart lies, it deserves to be eaten. Someone slaps the table and declares, no one knows. The gods change the rules all the time. Everyone nods. The stew is now cold. But the story lingers this idea that even in death, there's a test. And maybe a dinner table somewhere in the field of reeds where you'll sit again with everyone you've lost. Assuming you pass. The light fades quickly, casting long shadows across the village courtyard. A rooster, confused by the deepening gloom, crows once then falls silent. You step outside carrying a fresh cone of incense, a chipped cup of beer, and a folded scrap of linen. It's time for the evening ritual, again. The shrine looks different at sunset. The same niche, the same offerings, but now the air feels thicker closer. You place the beer beside the bread from earlier and light the incense. It catches with a soft hiss, curling smoke into the violet dusk. Then you whisper your prayers, shorter this time, not out of laziness, but because the words feel heavier now, like they're landing somewhere specific. Ancient Egyptians didn't honor the dead once a day. The cycle was more intricate than that. Morning brought vitality, evening reflection. Just as Ra descended into the underworld each night, so too did villagers turn westward to tend to their ancestral connections. Tombs faced the sunset for a reason. It wasn't symbolic, it was directional. West meant endings, but also preparation, a promise of return. You glance toward the horizon. The sun is a molten smear half sunk behind the dunes. Tomb chapels there catch the last light, their carved doorways glowing for one brief moment before dust swallows them. Someone once said that ghost hour begins when the sun touches sand and it feels true. Some villagers believe the dead are more active now, more receptive. You've heard stories of shadow passing in the corner of a home, a dream interrupted by whispers, a cat staring at nothing with alarming focus. One man insists his grandmother visits every Thursday at twilight to remind him to oil the floorboards. Another swears his father rearranges the pantry from beyond, neatly of course. Scholars call this folklore, but they struggle to explain why so many tombs include instructions for sunset rituals, or why certain prayers were only spoken after dark. Some argue it's rooted in agricultural rhythms when work ends, memory begins. Others believe the west wind itself was considered a carrier of voices, no consensus, just stories. You press the folded linen into the shrine's crevice. It's a token, nothing fancy, just your name, a brief thanks, and a small doodle of a fish. Your grandmother liked fish. Maybe she'll see it. Maybe she won't. But the ritual is the point. You do it because they did it. Because someday someone may do it for you. Behind you, other villagers perform their own quiet rites. One woman sings softly off-key but confident. A boy sprinkles salt in a careful circle. The air smells of myrrh and onions of smoke and soil. You feel a quiet presence, not eerie, not oppressive, just there, like background music played very far away. The incense stick burns low. You kneel, then rise slowly. Night has fully arrived. The stars begin their shimmer. And the dead, having been remembered once more, return to their stillness, fed, greeted, and seen. The bed is a simple frame of woven rope, creaking gently as you lower yourself onto it. The mattress, if one can call it that, is stuffed with straw and reeds scratchy but familiar. You adjust your headrest, a carved wooden curve balanced atop two blocks. It's not designed for comfort, it's designed for protection. Beneath the curve, tucked just beneath the linen pillowcase, are three small charms. One shaped like a snake, one like an eye, and one that no longer resembles anything but still feels important. You don't sleep unguarded. No one does. In ancient Egypt, sleep was not rest, it was risk. The body lay defenseless. The spirit wandered and the line between dreams and demons blurred. Protective amulets weren't superstition. They were nightly armor. Some people painted prayers directly onto their bed frames. Others placed spell-inscribed bricks at the corners of their rooms. A few particularly cautious souls even wore makeup to bed. Kohl eyeliner wasn't just for beauty. It warded off evil spirits with both glamour and chemistry. Tonight you've also placed a protective charm under the bed, a lump of carnelian carved into a lion's paw. You're not entirely sure what it's for, something about nightmares shaped like hippos, but it was a gift from your aunt who swore by it. She hasn't had a dream in 5 years. She says it like it's a victory. A soft rustle nearby draws your attention. Your neighbor's shutters clatter. A dog whines. You tuck the linen blanket tighter around yourself and whisper a few lines, half lullaby, half incantation. It's the same one your father used to recite about Ra guiding the boat through the underworld and scorpions that flee from sound. The Book of the Dead contains more than just funeral rites. It offers sleep protection spells, too. One verse warns against night terrors in the form of slithering things, while another guards against beasts with many faces. Not exactly lullabies, but reassuring in their way. Modern translators debate the meanings. Were these metaphors for bad dreams, sleep paralysis, or literal beliefs in shadowy forces that prowled the threshold of night? No one agrees, but the evidence is painted on tomb walls and inked on papyri. Sleep required safeguarding. It wasn't passive, it was navigation. You reach for a final charm, an Eye of Horus pendant carved from blue faience. It's chipped at the edge, but still gleams faintly in the lamplight. You place it beside your head, just so. It's said to protect vision, both waking and dreaming. You're hoping tonight's dreams stay more gentle than last week's crocodile wedding. Outside, the wind has stilled. A frog croaks once, then falls silent. The lamp flickers and dies. Your body is still, but your mind tiptoes toward memories, toward stories, toward that liminal realm where logic dissolves and your grandmother might appear offering advice about goats or taxes. Whatever comes, you're warded. Because in this world, sleep is not surrender. It's a journey through shadow, guided by amulets, ancestors, and a surprisingly aggressive snake-shaped bookmark. You wake with the image still clinging to your mind, a woman with silver hair and a basket of figs standing in your doorway. She didn't speak, just pointed to the east, where 7 stars flickered like oil lamps. Then you woke up. Heart pounding, mouth dry, the smell of figs still lingering. You sit up slowly, squinting at the dim room. The amulets are where you left them. The lion's paw seems heavier than before. You glance around. Nothing stirs. But the feeling remains like someone just left. Dreams in ancient Egypt weren't random firings of the brain. They were messages, warnings, invitations. The line between dream and vision was so thin it might as well not exist. A dream of your grandmother wasn't just memory, it was presence. She came back briefly to say something. Maybe the figs meant abundance. Maybe she wants you to check on your cousin. Maybe you're supposed to go east. Dream interpretation wasn't casual guesswork. It was a science, or at least a profession. Dream books' manuscripts of symbols and outcomes circulated widely. One famous version lists over 200 dreams and their meanings. If a man dreams he is drinking warm beer, it reads, it means an argument is coming. If a woman sees a crocodile weeping another line, claims she will receive a gift. Oddly specific, comfortingly absurd. You whisper a line from your own household's dream scroll. If the fig is ripe, fortune will arrive. If dry, beware of lies. It's vague enough to apply to anything, which is part of the charm. Your neighbor Henu once dreamed that Thoth himself handed her a shopping list. She woke up and found a forgotten order from the temple beneath her pillow, 3 scrolls, a jar of ink, and 2 feather pens. Coincidence or divine stationary management? Some villagers even consulted dream priests, special interpreters, who claimed to commune directly with the gods while sleeping. They'd sleep in temples, hoping to receive visions on behalf of clients. The practice called incubation was respected, but controversial. Some scholars argue it was theatrical, a mix of showmanship and placebo. Others believe it tapped into genuine psychological insight long before the Greeks coined the term. You rise quietly and walk to the shrine. The incense is long since burned out, but you offer a few words. If it was you, grandmother, thanks. But next time, maybe leave a note. The sky outside is beginning to pale. A rooster stirs. In the distance, a flute plays someone rising early, or perhaps still up from the night before. The village breathes half asleep, full of dreams. You return to bed and stare at the ceiling. There's a crack shaped like a bird, or maybe a jackal. You decide it's a falcon, Horus keeping watch. The dream lingers. You don't know what it meant, not yet, but it's planted like a seed. Maybe it'll bloom tonight, or maybe it already has and you're just waiting to understand its shape. Either way, you'll pay attention, because in this life and the next, the dead are never done speaking. The sun hangs low, casting a golden wash across the limestone walls of the temple precinct. You step through the shadowed archway, sandals crunching softly on swept stone, and nod to the boy holding a bundle of reeds. He's a novice, barely old enough to recite the offerings list, but already he knows to step aside when the embalming jars pass. Death isn't hidden here, it's business, sacred business. This isn't a place of worship in the way outsiders imagine. Yes, there are altars and incense. Yes, chants drift through the air like lazy birds. But deeper in, beyond the public courtyards, the temple's true machinery hums. A network of priest scribes, embalmers, and burial architects, all working in quiet coordination. Here death is logged, wrapped, and sealed with formulaic precision. You pass a chamber where a priest presses fresh resin into the crook of a corpse's elbow. In another, a scribe copies tomb texts with a reed pen, so worn it's more memory than tool. At the far end of the hall, 2 men argue over limestone cuts, debating whether the deceased's name needs 3 cartouches or just 2. Each task is separate, each role specialized, and somehow it all flows. Temple precincts like this one weren't just places of prayer. They were death hubs, multi-departmental operations that managed everything from funerary planning to physical embalming. Larger temples even ran their own workshops for coffin building and linen production. A well-organized precinct could prepare dozens of burials a week. Some families paid up front. Others left IOUs scribbled in haste, promising a goat or sack of barley by festival's end. Researchers continue to debate how many temple staffers were truly priests in the spiritual sense versus technicians with religious training. Some argue the line was blurred intentionally. A man might chant a hymn in the morning, then chisel eye holes in a coffin lid after lunch. One papyrus fragment details a curious case, a temple worker who both embalmed corpses and designed amulets, but was fined for carving his own likeness into a funerary charm. Too proud, apparently. Or too innovative. You follow a narrow corridor into a room lit only by a slit in the ceiling. 2 bodies rest on stone slabs, partially wrapped. A priest mutters while weaving linen around a wrist. You don't disturb him. Instead, you study the shelves lined with jars, Charm's oil flasks, and thin copper tools. A cat watches from the rafters. This is not grief, it is process. It's death handled with the same care as grain storage or tax collection, systematic, sacred, and surprisingly efficient. Outside, the smell shifts from resin to baked brick. You pass two temple boys dragging a wooden frame, probably a beer or maybe a drying rack for linen. One of them hums off-key unbothered. This is just Tuesday. You step back into the sunlight blinking. The outer walls glow their carved gods smiling in shallow relief. In this place, death is not an ending. It's a project measured, managed, and entered into the divine ledger, one quiet task at a time. The desert wind whispers as you climb the final rise, sandals sinking into warm sand. Before you stretches a small necropolis. Nothing grand, just a scattering of tomb entrances set into the limestone slopes, each marked with faded paint and time-worn symbols. But it's close. Just beyond the village boundary, close enough that your children play within shouting distance, and your grandmother's tomb is only a 5-minute walk from your kitchen door. You sit on a rock near the edge, watching as the sun prepares to dip behind the western hills. The tombs catch the light each doorway, glowing momentarily before the desert swallows the sun. It's beautiful and completely normal. Living beside tombs isn't morbid here. It's practical. In many ancient Egyptian communities, the dead were placed nearby, not in some remote cemetery, but within daily view. Tombs doubled as family altars, community landmarks, even picnic spots. You might eat lunch beside a cousin grave, leave flowers on your way to the well, or pause to fix a loose stone lintel because it's your uncle's resting place and he always hated mess. Some archaeologists used to assume this proximity was unintentional, a result of limited space or poor planning. But more recent evidence suggests the opposite. Villagers built near tombs deliberately. Tombs faced homes. Homes faced tombs. It wasn't a barrier, it was a bridge. You lean back and watch a lizard scurry across the stone. To your left, two children chase each other through the grave markers, sticks in hand, pretending to be gods of judgment. One shouts, "Your heart is too heavy," and the other shrieks and collapses dramatically onto the sand. Nearby, an old man carefully rearranges a bundle of dried herbs at his wife's tomb entrance. He hums as he works. Death here is part of the neighborhood. There's something deeply human about it, this coexistence, this refusal to exile the dead. In modern times, we often cordon off death, hiding it in hospitals or behind manicured cemetery gates. But in this village, it's a presence, a reminder, not of fear, but of connection. Your own home, just visible down the slope, holds remnants of this bond. A pottery shard with your grandfather's name, a cracked dish that once carried offerings, a single painted bead from a burial necklace now hung beside the window. Every object a thread, every tomb a knot tying memory to place. Some scholars propose this closeness blurred the line between mortality and memory, that by living beside the dead Egyptians, reshape death into something manageable, even familiar. Others argue it's simply logistical a way to keep family nearby, both emotionally and spiritually. Either way, the result is the same, a landscape where past and present coexist with remarkable ease. The wind shifts and a whisper of incense reaches your nose. Someone is performing the evening rite below. A chant rises faintly then fades. You stand brushing dust from your tunic. The stars are beginning to emerge. The tombs glow a little less now, their doorways slipping into shadow. You walk home, comforted not by the distance from the dead, but by their quiet, constant nearness. But far from the sands of Egypt, in a land where the air is thin and the sky impossibly wide, death takes a different shape. One not rooted in earth, but carried away on wings. Cold wind rushes over the Tibetan plateau. monks chant in deep, low pulses. A limp human form lies atop a lonely rock, surrounded by birds with bald heads and intelligent, waiting eyes. Here, death isn't hidden, it's given. Sky burial is not a punishment, it's a gift. And you're about to understand why. At more than 14,000 feet above sea level, the land is too rocky to dig. Wood is too scarce for cremation. And so, for centuries, the people of Tibet turned to the sky. Instead of hiding death away, they opened it up, offering bodies to nature's cleaners, the Himalayan griffin vultures. You arrive at a charnel ground, a ceremonial site usually found near a monastery. The morning frost still glistens on yak leather boots as monks prepare the scene. There's no hush of mourning. This is not a place of despair. Instead, it's almost procedural. The body is laid out on a flat rock slab. Butter lamps flicker. Wind carries the smell of juniper incense. What comes next may feel surreal. Ritual body cutters known as rogyapas begin their work. It's not violent, but methodical. Their task is to disassemble the body in a way that will make it easier for the vultures to consume. In Western terms, this might seem horrifying, but here it's sacred. Each motion is part of a well-rehearsed script. It's not about death, it's about generosity. A swirl of wings descends. The vultures with a wingspan, nearly 10 feet across, land in eerie silence. They wait for a signal. When it comes, they do not fight. They do not bicker. They simply begin. The body, once heavy with identity and memory, is returned to the sky in feathered fragments. A monk may stand nearby, reciting passages from the Bardo Thodol, the so-called Tibetan Book of the Dead. These aren't eulogies. They're navigational charts for the soul, guiding it through the intermediate state between death and rebirth. Imagine hearing those words meant to ferry a spirit as your earthly shell becomes sustenance. The reasoning is cyclical, and deeply Buddhist, the body is impermanent. Clinging to it invites suffering. Releasing it feeds life. And vultures. In this worldview, they're not morbid. They're part of the chain of compassion. Oddly enough, there are debates among scholars about when this practice began. Some say it's rooted in pre-Buddhist sky deities. Others point to practical needs driving ritual. Still others argue the symbolism came later, layered on top, like the butter sculptures used in temple offerings. No clear answer has emerged. But standing here, if only in your imagination, you feel the chill wind on your cheek, smell the sage and smoke, and hear the soft flap of feathers landing in snow. It is somehow peaceful. The silence after the vultures feels odd, doesn't it? But halfway across the globe and millennia earlier, another culture embraced stillness too, only they encased it in clay. In the dense forests of Neolithic Japan, long before emperors or samurai lived the Jomon people, their world was one of fishing, foraging, and fire. But when someone died, that fire took on a new role, shaping clay urns thick and round to cradle the departed. These weren't just jars. They were vessels of memory and sometimes a little leftover soup. You find yourself crouching under a canopy of cedar trees. A cluster of women mold a soft reddish paste into wide-mouthed pots. One of them presses her thumb against the rim, leaving a mark. Not just decoration, a signature. These pots, later found by archaeologists, often bear unique ridges swirls or chord impressions. Some are so ornate they seem more fit for display than burial. But in Jomon culture, practicality and reverence often shared a lid. The body, usually curled into a fetal position, was carefully placed inside the vessel. This pose, oddly intimate, echoed the shape of the womb. Birth and death, same posture, different direction. Some pots were fired to harden them. Others remained soft, breaking down with time. Scholars debate whether this variance was symbolic social or simply due to available firewood. No one agrees, but the contrast is striking. Now here's a quirky detail. Many of these funerary urns were found buried just outside the homes of the living, not in a faraway graveyard, but under the family's nose or floorboards. Imagine having tea above Grandma's jar. In some cases, families even pass these burial jars down, reusing them for generations. But here's the twist. Some researchers suspect that certain burial urns began their life as kitchen pots. That's right. Your soup pot might one day double as a coffin. It's not as macabre as it sounds. The Jomon didn't separate death from daily life, they folded it in. Clay was a constant companion for storage for cooking, and when the time came for remembrance. One excavation in central Honshu revealed a cluster of burial jars beneath a long abandoned hut. A dozen pots each with a slightly different pattern. Some had soot stains near the bottom, as if they had once sat over fire. Others had delicate punctures arranged in spirals. Were they meant to let the spirit breathe, or simply aesthetic choices? The debate continues. No written records survive, just the jars, quiet and enigmatic. It's easy to romanticize the past, especially in a forest lit by the amber flicker of flame. But these practices weren't dramatic. They were part of the rhythm of life: chop wood, catch fish, fire, clay. Honor the dead. The wind rustled through leaves above you. Somewhere, water drips into a wooden trough. And down below, sealed in the earth, a clay pot rests. Not abandoned, just asleep. You leave the forest and clay behind and descend into stone and silence. Now you're beneath the bustling streets of ancient Rome, where the dead waited quietly in shelves. It's cooler down here, and the walls close in. You've entered a columbarium, a beehive of tomb niches, each holding a single urn of cremated remains. There's no grand sarcophagus or ornate mausoleum. Instead, rows upon rows of tidy alcoves stretch upward like a library of lost names. Welcome to the Roman apartment complex for the afterlife. These underground chambers were built beneath gardens or on city edges, often commissioned by burial clubs or guilds. If you were a freedman merchant or low-ranking official, this was your best chance at post-mortem real estate. Each niche might be marked with a plaque, sometimes carved, sometimes painted. A name, maybe a job title, maybe just DM, short for Dismanibus, to the spirits of the dead. You run your fingers along the cool travertine. One alcove contains a round soot-streaked urn with faded red lettering, Livia Spinner of Wool. Another bears an image of Mercury Guide of Souls. You spot two child-sized niches side by side. One has a carved toy, the other a tiny clay rattle. Tenderness isn't just for the living. The design of these tombs, efficient, repetitive, and stacked, feels surprisingly modern. Historians debate their function. Were they built this way purely to save space in crowded cities, or was their status in being entombed among one's peers, like a deathly neighborhood watch? Some say the uniformity reflected Roman ideals of order. Others argue it simply fit the budget. Now, for the quirky bit, some columbaria had guest spots. Empty niches were held in reserve, waiting for benefactors or last-minute subscribers. And just like renting an apartment, your spot could be upgraded. Want a niche at eye level instead of up by the ceiling? That'll cost extra. Some of these tombs featured benches for visitors to sit and eat during parentalia, a festival honoring ancestors. Picture this. A Roman family descends the steps with baskets of bread, wine, and cheese. Children play near the tomb of Uncle Cassius. Someone spills wine on a niche. Laughter echoes between the dead. The boundary between life and memory blurs. In one famous columbarium near the Appian Way, archaeologists found urns jammed so tightly that the niches were doubled up. One urn rested awkwardly atop another. It's unclear if this was due to overcrowding or if someone forgot to pay for a second niche. Bureaucracy doesn't die with you. What's certain is that the Romans, despite their military conquests and grand architecture, treated the dead with a kind of bureaucratic affection. You weren't forgotten, just filed. And here in the quiet, where the walls breathe with centuries, you can still feel that hum of civic life even in death. A place for everyone and everyone in their place, neatly labeled ash to ash. You step out from under stone arches and into green light. The ground is soft, the air thick with humidity, and somewhere above you, a cicada clicks like a wooden metronome. Now you're in the highlands of the Philippines, surrounded not by gravestones, but trees. And in one of them, someone is resting. In certain indigenous communities, especially among the Apayaos and Kankanaey peoples, burial didn't happen underground. It happened above, in hollowed tree trunks lashed closed with vines and cloth, and hoisted upright like nature's own mausoleums. These tree burials weren't just symbolic. They were spatial reminders. The dead were still part of the village, still part of the land. You wander among moss-covered roots. A tree with peeling bark reveals a seam barely noticeable about shoulder height. That's the coffin. Inside in fetal position, once again, lies the body of a tribal elder, wrapped in woven fabric, arms crossed, eyes shut forever, or so it seems. This isn't a forgotten practice. Some versions of it linger even now, preserved in oral history, and in rare cases revived through cultural preservation efforts. The choice of tree mattered. Some believed that the sap carried the soul upward, a gentle ride to the next world. Others thought certain trees whispered more clearly to ancestors. It's hard to say which belief is older. Records blur. Memories become root systems. But one quirky belief stands out. A body buried in a tree would bless the land around it, bringing more fruit, richer soil, better shade. You can imagine children growing up with the idea that Grandpa helped the mangoes ripen, grief softened by gratitude. Unlike stone tombs, these arboreal coffins didn't last forever. The tree absorbed the wood. Insects took what they needed. Nature ever efficient cleaned house. But this slow disappearance wasn't viewed as loss. It was a return. To be reabsorbed meant you had completed the cycle well. Scholars remain divided on where this practice began. Some think it developed independently in various Austronesian cultures. Others trace it to ancient maritime traditions, where trees were seen as cousins to ships' vessels that carried souls instead of bodies. There's no scholarly consensus, just stories passed down like leaves on a breeze. In the Cordillera region, a few ancient tree burials still stand, though many have been relocated to museums or heritage parks. You look up at one now faded and sun-split. The bindings have slackened. A bird rests atop it, preening. Below, wild ginger grows in coils. You realize this isn't spooky. It's quiet, not eerie but watchful. Like the trees themselves are keeping company with those inside. Not guarding, just remembering. And as you listen, the wind doesn't whistle. It sighs, a slow, leafy breath like the forest exhaling after telling an old story. Now the trees thin and the ground underfoot squelches. You've arrived in Northern Europe, where the dead don't always decompose. Sometimes they just wait. Here in the boglands of Denmark, Ireland, and Germany, you meet bodies that skipped the usual exit process. Not buried, not burned, just placed and forgotten. Until centuries later, when a peat cutter's blade uncovers a face still frowning skin, like leather and hair perfectly parted. You've stumbled into the world of bog bodies. Unlike skeletal remains, these people were preserved in peat moss swamps, thick with tannins and low in oxygen. The conditions are oddly perfect for turning a human into a time capsule. The result? Wrinkled, puckered figures with clenched hands and still visible fingernails. Some even have eyelashes intact. You peer into a museum display. The body inside looks like it might wake up and complain about the cold. Tolan man. One of the most famous examples was so lifelike when found that police were called, assuming it was a recent murder. But he'd been resting quietly since about 400 BCE, curled peacefully with a rope still knotted around his neck. That's the uneasy detail many of these bodies show signs of violence. Strangulation, stabbings, broken bones. Yet they weren't hastily discarded. They were placed with care, some in shallow pits, others laid on woven branches. Was this execution, sacrifice, ritual, cleansing? Theories abound, and none agree. Some scholars argue these were criminals punished and dumped. Others believe the bodies belonged to kings or priests ritually offered to appease gods or secure harvests. The rope around Toland man's neck, for instance, was tied so precisely it could have been ceremonial. No signs of a struggle, just resignation or reverence. Then there's Graubal Mon, whose skull was split open with a single blow. Or Eud Girl, a teenager strangled with a woolen cord. Each body comes with mystery, and each debate only deepens it. Were these people revered, reviled, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? What's quirky and oddly charming is how these ancient dead have personalities now. Museum visitors leave flowers for them. Children give them nicknames. Toland man, with his serene expression, is often described as peaceful, while Lindo man from England is the overthinker, his face forever furrowed, perhaps in surprise. The peat itself becomes a character in this tale. It tints the bodies, brown turns their bones gelatinous, and leathers their skin like aged gloves. But it also preserves stomach contents. That's right, archaeologists have analyzed bog body last meals. Barley porridge seeds sometimes mistletoe. Theories sprout, was the meal symbolic poisoned? Just a regular breakfast, no one can say. And maybe that's the point. The bog doesn't tell stories. It just holds them, wet and still. You step back from the glass. The museum is quiet, only the hum of lights and the faint shuffling of shoes. Outside, the bogs remain, cold, damp, unbothered, and beneath them, someone waits. Forever pause between ritual and rot. From bog to beach, you cross the seas to Polynesia, where burial meant coral lava and quiet islands that whisper legacies through palm fronds. Here the dead were sealed in stone, but their memory flowed like rain. Imagine standing on a volcanic shore. Waves slap against black rock. You see nothing at first, just jagged lava, but then your eyes adjust. Nestled in the outcropping is a structure made of coral blocks, a tomb, not marked, not obvious, just hidden. This is where chiefs once rested. In many Polynesian cultures, especially in Tonga, Samoa, and the Marquesas tombs, were crafted from materials pulled from the ocean itself. Coral slabs shaped into boxy enclosures, sometimes sealed with basalt. There were no towering monuments, just sturdy platforms raised slightly above ground, blending into the volcanic landscape. Here, power wasn't displayed in height, but in permanence. You approach one and run your fingers along its surface. It's porous, rough, yet oddly warm. Inside, the remains of a leader carefully wrapped in tapa cloth, placed with ritual and sometimes accompanied by carved wooden figures. Not to scare off spirits, but to guide them. The islanders believed in a journey, not an end. Now, here's the curious part. Some of these tombs were built with drainage channels. Rainwater that pooled on the structure was intentionally funneled into underground cisterns. Archaeologists suggest the tombs doubled as water collectors. Death literally quenching life. Was it practical, symbolic? A bit of both, the jury's still out. One theory proposes that this water held spiritual significance filtered through the resting place of a chief. It became blessed, even medicinal. Imagine collecting your drinking water from Grandpa's grave. Comforting, strange. Depends on how you feel about metaphysical hydration. Some burial platforms, like Tonga's famous Langi, rise in layers triple-stacked coral terraces, precision cut and hauled from reefs miles away. Historians still marvel at the engineering. No mortar, just weight and fit. The stones sit perfectly after centuries, despite quakes and cyclones. It's as if grief itself was measured in blocks per layer. Not every island practiced the same. In parts of Hawaii, burial caves hidden in cliffs held bones wrapped in kapa and tai leaves. In Rapa Nui, ancestors were interred beneath massive stone statues, moai their faces eternally watching the sea. Burial customs varied widely, yet they all shared a common theme: the dead were not forgotten. They were integrated. There's something else: many of these tombs have no written names, no inscriptions, just presence. The community remembered who lay where, not through stone carvings, but through stories, chants, and genealogies recited like lullabies. It was memory by mouth, not marble. You sit beside one of these coral tombs as the sun sinks low. Crabs scuttle by, indifferent. A breeze lifts salt into your hair. And from somewhere in the trees someone hums a lullaby, maybe for a child, maybe for a chief, maybe both. Stone crumbles, names fade. But on these islands remembrance survives in rhythm, in rainfall, and in reef. Now you leave behind ocean wind for desert heat. The land is flat, dry, and pale until you spot something unusual rising from the horizon. A circular stone tower, its walls open to the sky. You've arrived in ancient Persia, where silence, not soil, received the dead. This is a tower of silence, or dakhma, built by Zoroastrians who believed the elements, earth, fire, and water, must be kept pure. Burying a body would pollute the soil. Burning it, an insult to sacred flame. So instead they turn to a fourth force, the sky. You step through the gate. A narrow path winds upward toward the tower's rim. Inside, the floor is divided into concentric rings. Men in one, women in another, children at the center. The bodies were placed here exposed to sun, wind, and scavenger birds, mostly vultures who arrived like clockwork. It feels stark, brutal even. But there's method beneath the austerity. This practice, called excarnation, wasn't about disrespect. It was about releasing the soul swiftly while leaving no trace behind. Flesh returned to nature. Bones, after they were bleached and dried, were gathered and placed into an ossuary pit at the center, a stone well of memory. Here's a surprising detail. The role of managing these burials fell to a priestly caste called the Nazu Salars. They wore long robes, metal tongs, and masks to avoid contamination. After placing the bodies, they'd purify themselves with ash and bull urine. Yes, you heard right, because ritual impurity was taken extremely seriously. Even the tower itself was carefully engineered. Raised above ground, it allowed air to circulate freely. Rain rarely touched the interior, and no plant roots could reach inside. Researchers still argue about the exact architectural influences. Were these towers modeled after older step altars, or were they uniquely Persian inventions? The debate remains open. Now, for the quirky bit, some towers had sun symbols carved into the entry stones. Not just for decoration, but to align burials with cosmic timing. Bodies were often placed shortly after dawn, allowing the first light to touch the deceased, a final warming. The tower you're in now has long been abandoned. No vultures circle above. But if you look closely, you'll find delicate etchings on the stones, names, faded prayers worn smooth. One inscription reads simply, "Return to the sky." You imagine that phrase whispered softly by a mourning mother, her hands folded, her child resting above. Over time, these towers were banned or abandoned as cities grew and public hygiene laws changed. Yet, in a few places, remote hills in India and Iran, they still stand. Quiet, empty, watching. You step back outside. The sun blazes overhead, and the air smells faintly of dust and rock. No incense, no chants, just the hush of heat and the occasional call of a far-off bird. In this place, silence isn't emptiness, it's devotion. A stillness built stone by stone, feather by feather, until only memory remains and the wind. The wind sharpens now, colder. You find yourself high on a hillside in Mongolia, wrapped in wool against the sting of the breeze. There's no tower here, no tomb. Just the open steppe and a low stone marker beside a carefully wrapped shape. This is where winter keeps the dead. Among nomadic Mongol communities, burials once followed the rhythm of the seasons. When the ground froze too hard to dig, families turned to nature for preservation. The dead were wrapped tightly in wool leather or felt and laid out on elevated ground, exposed but not abandoned. Here the cold was both mourner and guardian. You crouch beside a bundle tucked beneath stone slabs. There's no headstone, no epitaph, only the items left nearby. A knife, a felt pouch, maybe a wooden cup. These were not offerings, but essentials. The soul was believed to journey on after death, and it needed tools. The body remained behind like a tent left after breaking camp. The Mongols viewed life as movement across pastures, rivers, and time. Death didn't stop that. It simply redirected it. So they placed the body where the wind was strongest, where spirits wouldn't linger too long. The hills did the rest. One account describes a family timing the burial for just before dusk. The elder was wrapped in sheep wool bound with braided hair ropes and placed facing west, the direction of twilight. As the sun disappeared, they lit a fire of dry dung, the smoke curling in silent farewell. A horse was tethered nearby, though untied shortly after. Some believe it was symbolic transport for the spirit. Others argue it was to distract predators. No consensus exists, but the imagery lingers. Here's a surprising detail. Archaeologists have found traces of hearth smoke clinging to these burial wrappings even centuries later. It suggests that before the body was placed, it spent time near a fire, perhaps for warmth, ritual cleansing, or just company. A kind of final vigil. Sometimes snow would cover the site, entirely erasing its presence. The next spring, families might return and build a small cairn, but in many cases, no marker was left. The land remembered without stone, and so in time did the family through songs, genealogy recitals, and whispered stories over tea and fermented mare's milk. Of course, not every Mongol burial looked like this. Elites, especially during the Yuan dynasty, were sometimes buried in secret mountain tombs. Their locations remain unknown, intentionally lost. Some say Genghis Khan's tomb was hidden by a funeral caravan that killed everyone they met, then vanished into silence. A dramatic legend, but likely exaggerated. Still, it adds to the mystique. You sit now, the wind howling past your ears. Your breath fogs and disappears. In the distance, a single horse trots across the ridgetail, flicking. The sky is so wide it seems to sag. And somewhere beneath frost-hardened wool, a life waits to be remembered. The cold isn't cruel here, it's careful. It holds the past like a shepherd tending to sleeping sheep, soft, steady, and watchful. From frost-bitten plains to sun-bleached soil, you now step into the lands of myth and marble ancient Greece, where the boundary between life and death was marked by a single shining coin. Picture this, a small grave nestled along a dusty Athenian road. A young man lies wrapped in linen hands, folded neatly, jaw slightly open, and tucked between his lips, a gold coin glinting faintly in the sunlight. Not a treasure, a ticket. The fare for Charon, the underworld's boatman. In many parts of ancient Greece, placing a coin in the mouth of the deceased was believed to ensure safe passage across the river Styx. No coin, no crossing. The soul would wander the shore disoriented, forgotten. You can almost hear a grandmother muttering, "Better poor in life than stranded in death." This tradition wasn't reserved for the elite. Even humble graves have turned up coins, usually bronze or silver, occasionally gold. But here's a charming twist: some skeletons had fake coins. Clay discs painted gold. Scholars argue whether these were acts of poverty or piety. Were families too poor for real coins, or did they believe the gods couldn't tell the difference? Some tombs in Thessaly contained more than one coin just in case, for toll hikes, and others hid them not in mouths but hands or beneath the tongue. It wasn't standardized. It was cultural improvisation with a sprinkle of superstition. You kneel beside one gravesite and spot something even more curious: a coin etched with a trident symbol of Poseidon. Why Poseidon? He didn't rule the underworld. Was this a maritime soul hoping for divine navigation, or just a reused coin from a forgotten purse? Researchers still debate the meaning of such mismatches. In one particularly odd find, archaeologists uncovered a burial site in Sicily where over a dozen skeletons had coins placed not in mouths but in eye sockets. A mistake. An innovation, or simply the work of a funeral assistant with creative flair. Gold coins were typically reserved for wealthier citizens. But wealth didn't always mean safety. In some city-states, laws regulated how much could be spent on a funeral. Too much pageantry was considered tacky. A simple coin and a quiet farewell, that was the stylish exit. You pass a sculpted stele, its carvings faint with age, a young woman waving from a boat, hair-pinned up sandals delicately carved. Was she real? Probably not. But she represents thousands who left with coins between their teeth, hoping for a seat in the next world's ferry. Not all scholars agree on the literal nature of the practice. Some argue the coins weren't for the dead at all, but part of purification rituals or symbolic gestures. Maybe the fare wasn't paid to Karen, but to memory itself. Either way, you now stand by an ancient shoreline of the soul coins in Han River just out of sight. The air is warm still. You can almost hear water lapping against an unseen boat. From golden coins to golden faces, you now ascend the high desert plateaus of the Andes, where the Moshe people left behind something unforgettable: masks that stared back. It's early morning, and the wind slips down from the mountains in thin whistling breaths. You walk along the edge of a burial platform in what is now northern Peru. Below you, sand-colored bricks hide tombs, where elite Moshe individuals were interred, not just with pottery and jewelry, but with gilded death masks molded to resemble their living faces. These weren't just artistic flourishes, they were statements. You see, in Mochi belief, the mask wasn't to conceal identity. It was to preserve it, freeze it in metal for the afterlife. Scholars believe these faces were more than symbolic. They were meant to anchor the soul, offering a physical point of recognition as the spirit passed into new realms. You crouch beside one tomb, reconstruction. The mask, half buried in ceremonial dust, gleams faintly. It's not a full face, just eyes, nose, and upper cheeks. But there's expression in it: pride, serenity, maybe a hint of warning. Made from hammered gold or silver alloy, sometimes inlaid with shell or turquoise, these masks could take months to craft. And here's a curious detail: some masks have pierced earlobes matching the jewelry the deceased wore in life. It's identity down to the accessories. And now, the quirky bits: some of the masks appear to have exaggerated features, not distortions, but enhancements. Sharper cheekbones, wider eyes. Scholars argue whether these were idealizations or attempts to represent ancestor spirits rather than the individual. Were they self-portraits or metaphysical avatars? In one tomb at Sipan, archaeologists discovered a high-ranking lord buried with not one but 3 masks. One covered his face, another lay beside his head, a third was pressed gently against his chest. A backup identity. a symbolic echo no one knows. But the arrangement was deliberate, and the masks, delicate as they are, remain nearly flawless. Death in Moche cosmology wasn't an end, it was a shift in role. The deceased became intermediaries, speaking through rituals and symbols. Some believe the masks helped amplify this connection, allowing the dead to communicate with the living. Imagine a priest donning a replica mask during a festival, speaking in the voice of an ancestor, his face gleaming with the same metal as the tomb below. One researcher speculated that the shine of gold wasn't just decorative, it was practical. Reflective surfaces in ritual spaces might have been seen as windows or portals. A glint from a firelit mask could signal presence, attention, memory activated. You rest for a moment. The air is dry, the sun beginning to glare. In the distance you hear panpipes, maybe from a festival reenactment, maybe just your imagination filling the quiet. Either way, the masks still watch. Here where the sky meets stone and wind carries voices long gone, the dead do not hide. They gaze openly, boldly, as if to say, "Remember me not as bones, but as light." You trade the Andes for asphalt, rhythm, and revelry, because in southern Ghana, the dead don't go quietly. They ride out in style. Welcome to the gay community, where funerals don't mourn, they parade. And coffins forget pine boxes. Here you'll see the dearly departed carted off in chili peppers, Coca-Cola bottles, giant fish fighter jets, or even oversized sneakers. It's not a joke, it's honor, and it all begins with the question, who were you? You stand near a small wood shop outside Accra. The scent of sawdust clings to the humid air. Carvers shape plywood into curves and angles. One frame looks like a camera, another a Bible, a third is unmistakably a mobile phone. Nearby, a group of relatives gathers around a sketch. Their uncle was a fisherman. The coffin will be a marlin 12 feet long, complete with wooden gills and a mischievous smile. This practice, known as abebu adekai, literally proverb boxes, has been part of gay funerary tradition since the mid-20th century. It grew from earlier practices of symbolic storytelling in funerals, and was popularized by carpenters like Cain Kwai, who once built a palanquin in the shape of a cocoa pod for a deceased farmer. The trend caught fire. Now, a coffin tells a life story. Not everyone gets one. They're expensive. Families often save for months or even years. But when the time comes, the coffin becomes a centerpiece, not just for burial, but for celebration. The funeral turns into a public event, music, dancing, feasting, and yes, a brief moment where pallbearers hoist a giant lobster above their shoulders and march. Here's a quirky tradition. The coffin is often kept hidden from the deceased before their death, even if it's made in advance. It's considered bad luck to show it early, like sending an RSVP to the afterlife too soon. And here's where scholars begin to argue. Some believe the trend has diluted the original meanings, transforming cultural wisdom into visual spectacle. Others defend it fiercely as a living art, form a way of resisting colonial norms of grief, and celebrating lives through color and creativity. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the glittery fish-shaped middle. You peek inside one finished coffin. It's shaped like a Mercedes-Benz, plush lining, steering wheel carved into the lid. Someone clearly wanted to cruise into eternity. And really, who could blame them? Across town, another funeral is in full swing. A brass band belts out a jubilant tune. Mourners in matching t-shirts shout, "Sing and dance." Children weave between guests with soda bottles and fried plantains. The coffin, a giant chicken, is paraded down the road like royalty. It's festive, yes, but not shallow. The laughter, the absurdity, it all points to deep love. A refusal to reduce a person to silence. A promise to say, "We remember you not with whispers, but with joy." And as the music fades and the marlin-shaped coffin is lowered into the ground, you realize here even the final goodbye is an exclamation point. You leave the noise behind only to step into the driest silence on earth. The air crackles, the ground crunches like old paper. You're standing in the Atacama Desert of Chile, one of the only places on earth where the dead can lie down and not rot for centuries. Before embalming techniques, before elaborate rituals, some cultures relied on something far more indifferent: climate. In ancient Egypt and coastal South America, nature did the preserving long before humans took credit. Let's start in Chile with the Chinchorro people. They lived over 7,000 years ago, fisher folk who dwelled in one of the harshest environments imaginable. The desert was so dry that even a half-buried fishbone could remain intact for millennia. Bodies left in shallow pits became naturally mummified, organs shriveled, skin dried, but forms preserved. The Chinchorro noticed, and eventually they took over the process. You kneel beside a mummy, not wrapped in linens, but painted with black manganese. The head is capped with a wig made from human hair, the body stuffed with reeds. Bones were sometimes removed and replaced with sticks. It's a reverse-engineered human, more preserved art than corpse. These were the world's first artificial mummies, thousands of years before Egyptian techniques. And now, a strange twist: the Chinchorro mummified everyone. Adults, children, even stillborn infants. No social hierarchy. Some researchers believe this suggests a culture where the dead were seen as active members of the community, visitors, not relics. Compare this to ancient Egypt. The desert there also preserved naturally before priests added prayers and perfume. Bodies buried in the dry sand without coffins dehydrated quickly. Early Egyptians saw this and began mimicking it deliberately. But here's the debate. Did mummification evolve from observing desert preservation? Or was it always intended as spiritual preparation? You peek into a burial shaft in Saqqara. The body lies wrapped in linen, coated in resin. But underneath, you see the same shriveled hands, the same skin turned parchment thin. Whether baked in Atacama sun or dried under Nile sand, the result is eerily familiar. A human paused mid-journey. And here's the quirky part: in both regions, some mummies still smell. Not of decay, but of earth resin and time. Researchers handling Chinchorro remains report a faint scent of coppery minerals. In Egypt, it's frankincense and myrrh, or occasionally bitumen. One particularly well-preserved priest smelled like a tar pit and had to be stored separately. There's no scholarly consensus on who preserved better, Egyptians or Chinchorro. Some favor the Egyptians for technique. Others argue that Chinchorro mummification done by ordinary families without centralized religion shows a deeper intimacy. Maybe it's not a competition. Maybe it's just two deserts doing the same job differently. You stand now in the middle of arid nowhere, surrounded by the memory of skin and sun. A breeze carries sand against your ankles. Somewhere underfoot, someone's ancestor lies wrapped not in silk, but salt. And that's the secret of deserts. They take the messiness out of death and leave behind a body as dry, quiet, and patient as the dust itself. Now the horizon flattens again, but this time it's grass, not sand. You're in the open steppes of Central Asia, where ancient nomads built monuments not to be seen from the sky, but from the trail. Burial here meant altitude airflow, and often a few very curious architectural decisions. In the distance, you spot a tower. It's not tall, more like a layered cake of stone and clay. Each level stacked like forgotten fortifications. These are the burial towers of the steppe, part tomb, part wind tunnel, and entirely out of place until you understand the logic. You step closer. The walls curve slightly inward. Vents gape open like the mouth of sleeping wolves. Inside, dry air moves in lazy spirals, cooling the dark. Bones once rested here, not entombed, but aired, not hidden, but released. In nomadic cultures spanning from modern Kazakhstan to parts of western China, death required mobility. The deceased could not be left behind like anchors, so the burial towers, some called them kirege. Others, mudurli, became a compromise between movement and permanence. Here's a curious detail some towers have: bird perches built into their design, literal ledges where scavenging birds could rest while picking at remains. Not to desecrate, but to cleanse. The body-like in Tibetan sky burials was returned to the cycle, though with a more architectural flourish. Archaeologists have found burial towers lined with ceramic tiles, even painted with faded geometric motifs. Others were plain, just stone and dust. The variety has led to debate: were these for the elite only, or did different clans have different styles? Some scholars argue the towers doubled as signal posts, beacons to the spirits or perhaps to passing travelers. Others believe they were meant to be forgotten, slowly weathered into invisibility. One thing they agree on: these structures were never random. Each faced a specific direction, often towards sacred mountains or water sources. Orientation mattered. Wind paths mattered. Everything was designed for harmony, not just between life and death, but between stone and sky. And now, the quirky bit: some towers are so small, you'd assume they held only a single body. Yet, excavations have revealed layers of bones stacked like dusty bunk beds. In some, bones were moved and rearranged over time. Death apparently had a version of musical chairs. You peer into one, now dark, silent, smelling faintly of straw. A sunbeam catches a bit of bone ivory against shadow. The place feels neither eerie nor reverent. It feels ventilated, designed for breath. Nearby, tufts of feathergrass bend in the wind. A horse's distant whinny echoes across the steppe. And for a moment, you feel the logic of it. The dead aren't anchored here, they're passing through. The tower just slowed them down, a little long enough to be remembered. Out here where distances are vast and roads are made of wind, even a tomb needs air. And so, the towers breathe long after the lungs inside have stilled. You trade the wind-blown steppe for stone staircases and terraced hillsides. Now you're in Sicily, where tombs look suspiciously like apartment buildings, and the neighbors don't complain. At first glance, you might think you've stumbled into a quiet village, small houses with arched doorways, steps leading up to ornate doors, shutters even. But peek inside and you'll find shelves not for books, but for bones. These are the family tomb apartments of Sicily, especially common around Palermo and Catania, and they reflect a peculiar blend of reverence of practicality and a certain Mediterranean flair. You stand at the base of one now. A stone stoop leads up to a small iron gate. Inside, wooden drawers line the walls, stacked vertically, labeled with brass nameplates. Each drawer contains a body, usually wrapped in linen or placed in a simple coffin. Sometimes entire generations are stored in a single vertical stack, like ancestral filing cabinets. This isn't a cemetery in the modern sense. It's more like a neighborhood of the dead. Many of these tombs were built by families passed down like vacation homes and visited regularly. On All Souls' Day, relatives come bearing candles, pastries, and folding chairs. They sit outside, chat with cousins, and share updates with the deceased. Not out of superstition, but affection. The quirky part. These tombs often include decorations, porcelain flowers, lace curtains, even framed portraits. One doorway you pass has a mailbox mounted beside it. Another has a doormat. Scholars have debated whether this blending of domestic and funerary space is unique to Sicily, or part of a wider Mediterranean phenomenon. Either way, it's deeply personal. Some tombs are simple stone facades. Others boast Baroque embellishments, scrollwork, angel statues, gold lettering. But the layout remains consistent: rows of compartments accessible like lockers. In larger tombs, there are interior hallways with fluorescent lights and tile floors. You half expect to hear someone pushing a cleaning cart. And here's the debated bit why this drawer-style burial. Some say it emerged from practical constraints. Sicily's volcanic rock made deep digging difficult. Others link it to Catholic traditions emphasizing bodily resurrection, making above-ground storage more appropriate. Still others argue it's about family legacy, literally stacking history where everyone can see it. In Palermo's famous Capuchin catacombs, the idea is taken further. Their bodies aren't tucked away, but displayed dressed in their best seated in niches like they're waiting for a bus. A bit more theatrical than most, but it underscores the same cultural through line: the dead are not gone. They're just quieter now. You run your hand along one marble drawer. The name is faded, but beside it someone has taped a photo yellowing with time. A smiling woman in a polka dot dress holding a glass of wine. You don't know her, but for a moment she feels familiar. The sun dips low over the tiled rooftops. Swallows dart between tombs. And somewhere behind one of those quiet doors, 3 generations rest together, stacked like stories in a family album. Now the trail leads you away from stone into red earth and open sky. You've arrived in rural Africa, where the dead don't stay buried forever, and no one seems to mind. In parts of Madagascar, Mali, and among the Yue and Fang peoples, burial isn't a single event. It's a conversation, one that gets louder over time. Here, reburials, known in some regions as Famadi Hana or the turning of the bones, are joyful, vibrant, and anything but final. You arrive at a village during one such celebration. Music blares from handmade drums and horns. Children chase each other around tables piled with rice and roast goat. And in the center of it all, a family carefully exhumes a loved one's remains. Bones wrapped in fresh cloth are lifted with care and reverence. The mood festive. Relatives cheer, dance, and greet the departed like an honored guest who's just returned from a long journey. These ceremonies don't happen every year, maybe every 5 or 10. But when they do, entire communities come together. The point isn't to disturb the dead. It's to include them, to say you are still ours. The body is rewrapped, sometimes renamed, and often paraded around the village. Some families even photograph the event. It's not morbid. It's memory in motion. Scholars call it second burial, but the people here just call it tradition. Now here's the quirky bit. It's believed that the dead enjoy these visits, that they grow restless when forgotten. They want to dance, one elder once said. They want to hear the music again. And so families oblige. If someone's health declines or misfortune strikes, it's not unusual to blame it on a neglected ancestor who's feeling left out. The logistics vary. In some areas, bones are cleaned, rewrapped, and laid back in the original tomb. In others, they're moved to a new family crypt or shared ossuary. Sometimes they're reinterred with gifts, coins, dried herbs, or scraps of cloth. A new burial doesn't replace the old one. It continues it. Anthropologists have debated the origins of this practice. Is it spiritual, social, or ecological? Some argue it stems from ancestor veneration, common across much of sub-Saharan Africa. Others think it evolved to suit harsh climates where quick burial was followed by later ritual. Still others point to cultural resistance, keeping the dead close in a world that tried to push them away. Whatever the reason, the effect is unmistakable. Death doesn't sever ties here. It just stretches them like fabric between time and memory. As the music swells, you watch the family lift their ancestor high, dancing beneath the baobab tree. A great-grandchild slips a flower into the bundle. Someone sings a song that only the old ones remember. And when the sun finally sets and the bones are lowered once more, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a reunion, gently paused. In this place, even the dead get homesick sometimes, and it's only polite to let them visit. And now, as the last echoes of distant drums fade and the desert wind quiets its breath, You feel the long arc of tonight's journey settle gently around you. From icy hills to tropical forests, from coral tombs to earthen towers, the world's resting places have whispered more than sorrow. They've told stories of joy, memory, and quiet ingenuity. Perhaps you're still picturing a marlin-shaped coffin or a tower designed to breathe. Maybe you've found comfort in the idea that even centuries ago, people laughed, mourned, and honored their dead in ways both practical and poetic. Each custom strange at first begins to feel familiar, like an old tale remembered mid-dream. Let that feeling linger. If you'd like to return to stories like this, you can always subscribe quietly, of course. But before you drift off, tell me, where are you listening? From what time is it? And if you could borrow one burial ritual for your own journey someday, which would it be?